Okay, so now I want to talk about getting multiple promises using async await. So I'm going to use this code example, this function we created a few videos back called getData that takes in an endpoint. We're returning a promise and we're resolving with the data from that endpoint, whether it's a file or a URL to an API. It's just going to get us the data. And we put the send in a set timeout so we get it within 1 to 4 seconds. And then the way that we handled it was by calling getData, which returns a promise. We passed in this movies.json file, and then we called it .then because it returns a promise. And then we returned getData again with actors, which made it so that when we chain on another .then, we get those actors, console log them, return getData again with the directors. So in the next .then, we got the directors and log them. And the result, if I reload the page, it's going to get these files, the data from these files, in the correct order. So each one will be between 1 and 4 seconds. So we have the movies, then we have the actors, and then the directors. Now I want to show you how we can do the same thing using async await. So I'm going to comment that out, and we'll come down here, and we're going to create an async function, and we'll call this getAllData. And let's make sure we call it, because I always forget that. So what I'm going to do is just create a variable and then call it movies. And I want to await on the getData function that returns a promise. And I'm going to pass in here ./movies.json, which I do have in my folder. So I have the 3 JSON files in here. So just doing that, I should be able to console log movies. Save that, and within 1 to 4 seconds, we should see our array of movies. So I think this looks a lot cleaner than having to call to getData and then put a .then after it and then pass in a function. Here, where it looks like synchronous code, right? We're just setting a variable of movies and we're getting it from movies.json. If I want to get, let's just copy this. If I want to get the actors, let's change these to actors and up that too. We want to console log it, and then that, and that. We're going to change to directors, and I'll save that, and this should behave just like this. So we get the first movie, or first, I should say, movies, the movies array, then we get the actors, and then directors. Now, even better, I console logged this after we got the movies, so it does take a little time, but I could just get rid of that, and then console log down here, movies, actors, and directors, and save that. And what'll happen is it'll get them all, and then they should just pop right in here. Okay, because I'm waiting till the end to console log. Now, this whole function is asynchronous, right? If I put something in here, like if I do a console log 1, 2, 3, that 1, 2, 3 is not going to run until this is done, because we're waiting on this and this and this to be done. However, the whole function is asynchronous. If I come down here after the function and I console log 1, 2, 3 and I save, that's going to run because this is asynchronous. It's going through that whole process that I showed you before when it puts the callback into the micro task queue and then into the call stack. But any code after it is going to continue to run. Now, what I want to do next is show you how we could fetch this data using async await with the fetch API and skip using this getData function, because I mean this was for learning. I wouldn't do this in real life. There's no reason to use the XHR object and write all this code when we can simply use the fetch API. But it is a learning experience, and now you should know exactly how this works. So let's come down here and we'll get rid of this console log, and I'll get rid of calling this function, and let's create another. Actually, we'll create it up here. Let's say async function, and let's say get all data with fetch. With fetch. So basically we're going to do the same thing, but instead of using our custom get data function that uses the XHR object, we're going to use the fetch API. So let's say const movies. Now remember, we get a response. That's what is nice about this get data is it just returns the data. It doesn't have a whole response object. But then again, that response object comes in handy to do certain things. But so remember, we need to get two things: the response. So I'm going to call that movie res, and we'll set that to await, and then fetch. Let's pass in here just ./movies.json. And then we'll create a variable called movies, and that's going to have the data. So we need to await on the response. I called it movie. Now the reason I'm calling it movie res is because we have more than one promise we're dealing with. So I'm not going to use res because I have other responses too. So let's say movie res.json. All right, and then what I'll do, let's just copy this down. And let's see, we'll go ahead and change this. So this here, let's change that, and that to actors. Yeah, we'll say actors res, fetch the actors.json, and then get the actors data. All right, and then down here, we'll grab that, and that, say directors. Okay, so now we should be able to go ahead and log all that. So console log movies, actors, and directors. Save that. Oh, we got to run it. Get all data with fetch. Save that. And there we go. So we should get the movies, the actors, and the directors. And it's always going to be in that order because we're awaiting for the movies, waiting for the actors, and then the directors, and then we log all of them. Now we can also use promise.all with async await. So remember, I showed you how to use that to kind of cut down the chaining that we did here. So let's comment out this function, and then let's create another async function, and we'll call this get all data promise all. I know it's a long function name, but and remember, we can do promise dot all, and that takes in an array of promises that you want to execute. So what we did in the video where I first showed you about promise.all, we put in our get data calls here, and then you do dot then, and then you get an array of the promises that you get back from whatever you put in here, which in our case was the data. Now with fetch, it's a little different because we have to get the response and then we get the data. So what I'm going to do is pass in here each fetch call. So we'll say fetch, and let's say ./movies.json. So that's going to be a promise with the response object, right? And we'll do the same for the other two resources. Let's do for actors and for directors. All right, so that's going to give us the response objects. So what I'm going to do is actually await on this and set, I'm going to use a little destructuring here, and in this array we should be able to basically pull out the promise that this gives us, which is the response. So let's say movies res, and then I should be able to get the next one. So we'll say actors res, and then the next one directors res. So now I have the response object from these fetch requests in these variables. So now I can simply come down here and say const movies and set that to movies res.json to get the data. Same thing with the other two. So I'm going to just grab this and say actors, and then we'll grab this and say directors. And then we'll just console log movies, actors, and directors. Save that. Oh, we have to call it get. Oh, I think I've done that like three, 4 times. So let's run that. Okay, so we're getting the promise, and that's because I did not await on these. right? What this is on its own is a promise. We need, if we want to actually get the data from it, then we have to await or do a dot then, either way. So let's save, and now we get the data. Now you can still use dot then if you want, if you don't want to put separate variables down here. So I'll give you that example. So if I copy this, and I'll call this get all data promise all to, and let's say we want to just instead of using these down here, let's change these variables to movies and actors and directors. Now instead of just getting the promise, the first promise with the response object, I'm going to add on to this the dot then, and then pass in the res, and we want to get the res.json. Okay, so we can just grab this, this right here, dot then, and then the rest of this, put that there, there, and now instead of getting the response, we're getting the actual data, and that's what's going into these variables. So now if I were to call that, so let's call to, run that, and we get the same thing. So you can do it either way. I mean, you've seen me do like 4 or 5 different ways to do the same exact thing. So there's not a right and wrong way. And if you choose to do it with dot then, or even if you choose to do it with callbacks, it's not bad. I think that when it comes to the internet and it comes to like Stack Overflow and stuff, a lot of people criticize anyone that writes code in a different way than they do. So you just have to kind of understand that and not let it get to you, and not let what people say get to you, because any of these are fine. They're all doing the same thing. They're all pretty readable. They all work. So pick whatever way you want is what I'm saying. All right, guys. So I think that's it for this section, at least for now. So what I'd like to do next is build a bigger project. We're going to create a little movie app using a movie API that will give us all kinds of movie data, actor data, just all kinds of stuff. And we're going to build a little app called Flicks. All right, so we'll get to that next.